When the world goes quiet, some voices still remain. Not every soul finds peace when the clock strikes 12. There are stories hidden in the shadows, whispers drifting between the living and the forgotten. Some stories linger, some souls don't leave. Welcome to Stillness After Midnight, where every silence tells a story. If you're drawn to the mysteries that stir after dark, the voices that echo when the world sleeps, subscribe now and join us as we listen to the souls who still have something to say, because in the stillness, the truth finally speaks. I still remember the heat of that night when I first stepped off the bus in Chiang Mai. The air was heavy, almost sweet, thick with the smell of grilled meat from street vendors and the faint fragrance of burning incense that clung to the old temples scattered across the city. I was 28 then, restless and curious, with more questions than answers about the world. My name is Daniel Carter, and I came to Thailand not for beaches or parties, but for something far stranger. Whispers of rituals that blurred the line between the living and the dead. I had been working as a freelance travel writer for a few years, and though my friends envied what they thought was a life of freedom, the truth was that I was chasing something I couldn't quite name. My articles on food and culture barely paid the bills. What really drove me was the folklore, the half-forgotten stories villagers told in hushed tones, the myths you couldn't find in any guidebook. Every country had its shadows, and I wanted to walk among them. Chiang Mai in the north of Thailand seemed the right place to begin. It was a city of contradictions, the hum of motorbikes weaving through narrow alleys, golden spires of temples rising above crowded night markets, monks in saffron robes gliding silently past neon signs. And then there was the moon. Even on that first night, as I dropped my backpack onto the bed of a cheap guest house near Thai Gate, I noticed it, low and swollen, with a faint copper glow, as though some ancient hand had stained it with blood. I didn't know it then, but that moon would follow me, just as something else would. The guest house owner, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a voice like soft rain, warned me as she handed me the keys. "Many foreigners come for fun," she said, "but be careful if you walk alone near the old temples after midnight. Some spirits here do not like to be disturbed." Her words should have unsettled me, but instead they drew me closer. That was my flaw, I suppose. I never turned away from the door marked forbidden. The next evening, I found myself wandering through the night bazaar. Lanterns hung in rows overhead, casting pools of warm light on tables cluttered with amulets, carved wooden masks, and bundles of herbs tied with red string. The air was alive with sound, the metallic clash of a gamelan ensemble, vendors shouting in Thai, and the low murmur of tourists bargaining. That's where I met them, 5 others who would become companions on a path none of us could escape. Sophie was from France, quick-witted and sharp-tongued, traveling with her boyfriend Mark, who had the careless confidence of someone who believed nothing could harm him. Then there was Nadia, a Thai university student with bright eyes and a fascination for Western ghost stories. She introduced us to Aaron, her childhood friend, a quiet young man who rarely spoke but carried the air of someone who knew more than he admitted. The last was Chris, an American like me, though louder, always laughing as if to push away any trace of unease. It started casually with drinks and shared plates of sticky rice and spicy curries. But before long, the talk turned to the very thing that had brought me here: ghosts, rituals, and the kind of stories locals only told when the night grew thick. Nadia leaned forward, lowering her voice so that the noise of the market seemed to fade around us. "Have you heard about the red moon ritual?" she asked. The table fell quiet. Sophie rolled her eyes, but I felt my chest tighten. "Tell me," I said. Nadia explained that once every few years, when the full moon took on a crimson hue, certain villages performed a forbidden rite. No one knew its exact origin. Some claimed it came from old Lana Kingdom practices. Others whispered it was borrowed from older, darker beliefs hidden beneath Buddhism's golden surface. The ritual, she said, was meant to summon the restless dead, to bind them with incense smoke and mirror reflections. It was never meant for outsiders, never meant as a game. But of course, young people had turned it into one. Arun finally spoke, his voice barely audible. I've seen it once. Not the ritual itself, but what followed. A boy in my town tried it with his friends. He laughed when the chanting was done. But when he walked home, his shadow was no longer his own. He died within a month. People said the shadow stayed. His eyes flicked to mine as though testing whether I believed. I wish I could say I laughed it off, but instead I felt the kind of thrill you feel when you lean too far over the edge of a cliff. Chris slapped the table. Sounds like the perfect story for us to try. Come on, Daniel, this is exactly the kind of thing you're always looking for, right? He wasn't wrong. Even as I shook my head, even as I told myself this was reckless, I knew I would follow. Curiosity has its own gravity. Later, back in my guest house room, I couldn't sleep. The sounds of the street had faded, leaving only the distant barking of stray dogs and the occasional rattle of a passing tuk-tuk. I stared at the ceiling fans spinning shadows across the walls. In the silence, I remembered something the guest house owner had said when I asked her if the red moon ritual was real. Real or not, she murmured, it is not good to invite what you cannot send away. Her words clung to me, but so did Nadia's story. Somewhere beyond the hum of the city, in an abandoned temple swallowed by jungle and silence, young people were daring the unseen to answer. I told myself I would only watch, only record, perhaps turn it into another article no editor would publish. But in my heart I knew I had already stepped across a threshold, because when I finally closed my eyes I dreamt of the moon again. Redder this time, vast and swollen, its light dripping like blood across the tiled roof of a ruined temple. And in that light I saw a figure, not clear, not yet, but waiting, always waiting. I woke with a start, the sound of wooden clogs echoing faintly down the hallway outside my door. When I opened it, there was no one, only a curtain at the end of the corridor swaying gently, as if brushed by unseen hands. That was my first night in Chiang Mai, the first step into a story I wish I had never chased. And yet, here I am, telling it to you. The second day in Chiang Mai was drenched in sunlight, yet I couldn't shake the weight of the dream from the night before. The image of that swollen red moon clung to me, stubborn as smoke. I wandered the city aimlessly, notebook in hand, pretending to be a traveler gathering impressions. But the truth was, I was listening, for words, for whispers, for anything that might lead me closer to the story I had stumbled upon. Chiang Mai has a way of making you feel suspended between worlds. The modern cafes with their polished wood and air conditioning sit only a few steps from temples older than memory. The walls of the old city, half crumbled yet enduring, seem to hold back not only the traffic but time itself. As I walked along the moat, lotus leaves floating lazily on the water, I caught myself staring at the temple roofs, their golden edges glinting in the sunlight like watchful eyes. That was when I met the old man. He was sitting near the entrance of Wat Phra Singh, selling small bundles of incense and candles to tourists. His skin was weathered, carved with lines that spoke of many decades under the Thai sun. Most people passed him without a glance, but something in his stillness caught me. His eyes followed me as I approached, not with the usual eagerness of a vendor, but with a kind of quiet recognition. "You are not here for photos," he said in English that was rough but clear. "You are looking for stories." I froze. "Yes," I admitted. He lit a stick of incense and let the smoke curl upward before speaking again. "Be careful what story you ask for. Some stories, once heard, will follow you home." I wanted to laugh, to brush it aside, but the way his gaze held mine made it impossible. I asked him then, as directly as I could, if he knew anything of the Red Moon ritual. The reaction was immediate. His expression hardened, and he lowered his voice until it was nearly a whisper. "You should not speak of it here, not under the sun. That ritual belongs to the shadows, to blood and to debt." He told me fragments, pieces of something older than the city itself. Long ago, he said, during times of war and plague, certain monks had turned to forbidden practices. They sought to trap wandering souls, binding them with mirrors and offerings to protect villages from misfortune. But the ritual was never clean. It required a bargain. Once begun, it could not be undone. The moon turns red when the hungry dead are strongest, he murmured. If you call to them, they will answer, and they will not leave. I pressed him for more, but he shook his head and turned his attention to the tourists who had begun to gather nearby. It was as though the conversation had ended, erased by the ordinary rhythm of commerce. Yet his words stayed with me. They will not leave. That evening I met the others again at a street-side bar. Strings of colored lights dangled above us, swaying gently in the warm breeze. The clink of ice in glasses, the hiss of skewers grilling, the faint strum of a guitar somewhere down the street. All of it seemed to soften the edges of the day. But the conversation sharpened quickly. Chris was the first to bring it up. So, are we actually doing this or what? Nadia, you said you knew a place. Nadia hesitated, biting her lip. There's an old temple outside the city. People say it's abandoned because of accidents. No one goes there at night. But during a red moon, she trailed off, eyes darting toward me, as though seeking reassurance. Mark laughed, shaking his head. It's just a game, a way to scare ourselves. Perfect travel story, right, Daniel? I forced a smile, though unease gnawed at me. Part of me wanted to warn them, to repeat the old man's words. But another part, the part that had led me here in the first place, was already leaning forward, hungry for more. Sophie poured herself another drink and said, Fine, if we're doing this, then let's at least do it properly. No half measures. Arun, who had been silent most of the night, finally spoke. His voice was low, deliberate. You don't understand. It's not like Western games with Ouija boards. This is not pretending. When the moon is red, the line between us and them is thin. If you call, someone will answer. His words sent a chill down my spine, though Chris only chuckled. Sounds perfect. I'm in. Nadia gave me a questioning look. And you, Daniel? Will you join? I should have said no. I should have remembered the incense seller's warning, the guest house owner's advice, the dream that still clung to my skin. But instead I nodded. Yes, I heard myself say. I'll join. Later that night, back in my room, I wrote furiously in my journal. Not for an article this time, but for myself. I described the old man's face, the way his eyes seemed to pierce through me, the tremor in Nadia's voice. I drew a rough sketch of the moon as I had seen it. Low, round, tinged with copper. The streets outside grew quieter, the laughter of tourists fading into the distance. I left the window open to let in the night air. But what drifted in was not only the scent of jasmine and smoke, it was a sound. At first faint, then clearer. The slow, deliberate clack, clack, clack of wooden clogs on stone. I froze, pen suspended above the page. The sound grew closer, echoing down the alley beneath my window. But when I leaned out to look, there was nothing. Only shadows stretched by lantern light and a curtain stirring gently in the breeze. I told myself it was imagination, the residue of stories already nesting in my mind. But as I turned back to my desk, I noticed something on the page I had just written. A smear of red, not ink, at least not from my pen. I touched it, half afraid, half disbelieving. It was dry, flaking at the edges, like old blood. And when I looked back out the window, the moon was rising again, round and swollen, its color deepening toward crimson. By the time we finally agreed to seek out the temple, the moon had already begun its slow climb across the sky, tinged faintly with that unsettling hue of copper. I tried to tell myself it was only coincidence, that the moon looked red simply because of dust in the atmosphere, or the way the clouds drifted across its face. But deep down, I felt the weight of inevitability. We met just outside the old city walls, where the tuk-tuks rattled past in dwindling numbers, their neon lights fading into the night. Nadia led us, clutching a small cloth bag she refused to open, while Arun walked slightly behind her, silent as always. Sophie and Mark whispered to each other, their laughter forced, brittle. Chris strutted at the front, humming tunelessly as if to drown out his own unease. I followed, my heart heavy, notebook tucked into my jacket pocket. Every few steps I glanced at the moon. It seemed to follow us, its glow spilling across rooftops, painting the city in rust-colored light. We left the bustling streets behind and moved into quieter alleys, where the lamps burned dimmer. Dogs barked from behind gates, then fell silent as we passed, their eyes glinting in the dark. The road sloped upward, carrying us toward the hills that cradled Chiang Mai. The air grew cooler, sharper, carrying the scent of wet earth and distant fires. After nearly an hour, Nadia stopped before a narrow dirt path that split from the main road. Vines curled over the entrance, as though trying to hide what lay beyond. "This way," she whispered. The path wound deeper into the trees, where even the sound of the city seemed to vanish. The only noise was the crunch of our footsteps, and every so often, the rustle of unseen creatures moving in the underbrush. My pulse quickened. Each step felt like a descent into some place forgotten by time, a place we weren't meant to enter. And then we saw it. The temple rose before us, shrouded in darkness, its wooden beams sagging, its once bright paint faded to dull streaks beneath a skin of moss. The gate leaned crookedly, half swallowed by vines, while stone guardians at its entrance were cracked and eroded, their features blurred as if ashamed to be recognized. A single bell swayed in the breeze, though no sound came from it. Only the faint creak of rusted metal. For a long moment, none of us moved. Even Chris fell silent. "It's beautiful," Sophie murmured, though her voice trembled. I didn't think it was beautiful. I thought it looked hungry. Inside the temple grounds, the air grew heavy with the scent of old incense and damp wood. Cobwebs draped across broken doorways, and the floor creaked under our weight. A scattering of shriveled offerings, dried flowers, rotting fruit, candle stubs, lay before a cracked statue of the Buddha, its serene face marred by time. Nadia knelt and opened her cloth bag. Inside were sticks of incense, a small mirror, and a porcelain doll no bigger than her hand, its painted eyes wide and unblinking. She explained almost apologetically that these were necessary: the smoke to guide the spirits, the mirror to reflect them, the doll to anchor their presence. I wanted to ask where she had learned this, but I didn't. The words caught in my throat, smothered by the oppressive silence that pressed in from all sides. Mark chuckled, trying to dispel the tension. "So what? We light some incense, chant a little, and then a ghost pops out? Sounds like a Halloween party." But when he touched the doll, Nadia slapped his hand away. "Don't joke," she snapped. "This isn't for fun." For the first time, I saw real fear in her eyes. We cleared a space in the center of the main hall. The floorboards groaned as we sat in a circle, knees nearly touching, the mirror placed in the middle with the doll propped beside it. Nadia lit incense, and smoke coiled upward, twisting into strange shapes before dissolving into the shadows. The air grew cooler, so suddenly I could see my breath. Aaron began to hum, a low droning sound that seemed to vibrate through the wooden beams. Nadia joined in, her voice trembling at first but then steadier, forming words in Thai that I didn't understand. The cadence was strange, uneven, rising and falling like the waves of a tide pulling us deeper. I closed my eyes. At first there was nothing, only the smell of incense and the sound of chanting. Then came another sound, faint but distinct, the slow clack, clack, clack of wooden clogs echoing through the hall. My eyes flew open. The others heard it too. I saw Sophie's hand grip Mark's arm, saw Chris glance nervously over his shoulder, but Arun and Nadia kept chanting, their eyes half closed as if entranced. The sound grew louder, closer, and with it came a pressure, as though the air itself were thickening around us. Shadows stretched along the walls, bending in ways that didn't match our movements. Then I saw it, in the mirror, a shape, indistinct at first, standing behind us. Taller than any of us, cloaked in darkness, its face hidden. It didn't move, yet its presence was undeniable, like a weight pressing down on my chest. My breath caught. I wanted to shout, to break the circle, but fear rooted me in place. The chanting reached its peak, voices rising in unison. The incense smoke thickened, swirling around the doll, and in the mirror the shadow leaned forward. Closer, closer, until I felt the chill of its breath on the back of my neck. Then, silence. The chanting stopped. The smoke thinned. The sound of clogs ceased as abruptly as it had begun. We sat frozen, staring at the mirror. The shape was gone. Only our pale reflection stared back, wide-eyed and trembling. Chris exhaled loudly, forcing a laugh. Well, that was creepy, but nothing happened, right? Just smoke and shadows. No one answered him, because in that moment, as I glanced around the circle, I saw it. Each of us had a shadow at our back, cast by the faint light of the moon through the broken roof. But there was one too many, 7 shadows, for 6 people. We left the temple in silence. The air outside was warmer, almost stifling, yet I couldn't shake the chill that clung to me. Each step back down the path felt heavier, as though something unseen followed in our wake. And when I dared to glance over my shoulder, I could have sworn I saw movement among the trees, just at the edge of vision, always too quick to catch. That was the night we opened the door, and none of us realized what had walked through with us. I used to think fear came all at once, like a sudden storm breaking over your head. But that night, in the abandoned temple, I learned the truth. Real fear seeps in slowly, like water through cracks in the floor, until you realize the room around you has already drowned. We had returned to the temple the following night, as if compelled. None of us spoke of what we'd seen in the mirror, but it hung between us like smoke. Sophie insisted we had imagined the 7th shadow. Mark laughed it off, though his laughter was thin. Chris treated it like a game, bragging that he had felt something brush against his arm. Aaron said nothing, and Nadia, her face pale, carried the cloth bag again, the doll hidden inside. The moon rose higher, redder, casting its glow through the broken roof beams. The temple seemed alive beneath it, the shadows shifting as though they had their own pulse. We gathered in the main hall once more, our circle tighter this time, our breaths uneven. Nadia placed the doll before the mirror and lit 3 sticks of incense. She whispered words in Thai that I couldn't understand, her voice trembling at first but growing steadier, as though the ritual itself was guiding her. "Everyone hold hands," she said softly. Her fingers were cold when they touched mine. The air thickened almost immediately, heavy with the sharp sweetness of incense. My chest tightened, as if I were inhaling smoke instead of air. We closed our eyes and Nadia began the chant. Aaron joined her, his voice lower, steadier, carrying the rhythm. The sound filled the hall, echoing against cracked walls and broken statues. I tried to focus on the words, though they were meaningless to me. My pulse beat in time with the chant. The air seemed to vibrate, a low hum that settled into my bones. Then came the sound again. Clack, clack, clack. Wooden clogs striking stone, slow, deliberate, the sound of someone walking where no one should be. My grip tightened around Sophie's hand. She flinched, but she didn't open her eyes. None of us did. Perhaps we were too afraid of what we would see. The sound circled us, measured, patient. With each step, the air grew colder until my breath came out in pale wisps. Then it stopped, and in the silence I felt it. Something behind me, a presence so heavy, so close, I could almost feel its shadow pressing against my back. Against my will, my eyes flicked open. The mirror in the center reflected us, our circle of 6. But behind each of us, clear as day, stood a figure, tall, cloaked in black. faces hidden as though swallowed by shadow. One behind Sophie, one behind Mark, one behind Chris, one behind Nadia, one behind Aaron, and one behind me. I couldn't breathe. My body screamed to run, but my hands were locked in the circle. The incense smoke swirled violently, though there was no wind. The doll's painted eyes gleamed in the firelight, and for a moment, God help me, I thought they blinked. Nadia's voice rose higher, desperate now. The chant became sharper, more urgent, as if she were pleading. Aaron's voice wavered, then cracked, but he forced himself to continue, and then the shadows leaned closer. I felt cold breath on the back of my neck, like winter air spilling into a sealed room. My skin prickled, my stomach knotted. The figures in the mirror moved, though none of us had. Mark swore under his breath. Sophie let out a choked sob. Chris muttered, "Jesus Christ." But his voice was hollow. I wanted to scream, but the sound died in my throat, because that was when I realized the reflection in the mirror was not quite ours anymore. My reflection's eyes were wrong, too dark, too deep, like pits leading somewhere endless. Its lips curved into a smile I did not make. The same was true for the others. Their reflections grinned with mouths too wide, eyes gleaming with something that wasn't human. And behind each of them, the shadow figures rested hands on their shoulders. "Close the circle," Nadia whispered, though her voice trembled with fear. "Do not break it." But it was too late. The air shuddered. The walls groaned as though under immense weight. The incense flames flickered blue, then green, then went out, plunging the hall into near darkness. Only the moonlight remained, red, unyielding. I squeezed my eyes shut. The sound of wooden clogs returned, louder now, circling us faster and faster. I could feel the vibrations through the floorboards. My heart pounded. My breath came in shallow gasps. And then, silence. Utter, suffocating silence. When I opened my eyes again, the mirror was empty. No shadows, no twisted reflections. Only us, pale and shaken, clutching one another like survivors of a storm. For a moment I dared to believe it was over, that we had endured some trick of the mind, a fevered dream born of incense and fear. But then I saw it, not in the mirror, not in the shadows, in the faint reflection of the broken glass window above us, a seventh figure, standing behind us still, watching and smiling. We broke the circle at last, stumbling to our feet, gasping for breath. Nadia snatched the doll and shoved it back into her bag. Aaron muttered prayers under his breath, his face ashen. Chris forced a laugh, though his voice cracked. "Well, that was intense, but we're still alive, right?" None of us answered, because even as we stepped out into the night, I knew the truth. The ritual hadn't ended. It had only begun. I remember the walk back from the temple more vividly than the ritual itself. The forest path, though familiar from the night before, felt different, denser, as though the trees had shifted closer together while we were inside. Each branch creaked in the wind like bones being bent. The insects that had once filled the air with their endless chorus were silent now, as if nature itself had recoiled from us. We spoke little. Nadia led the way, her hands clutching the cloth bag so tightly that the veins stood out in her wrists. Aaron walked behind her, lips moving soundlessly in a prayer that seemed never to end. Mark muttered curses under his breath, while Sophie stumbled often, her face pale, her eyes glassy. Chris was the only one who tried to laugh, but the sound died quickly each time, swallowed by the heavy night. As for me, I walked in the middle, notebook pressed against my chest like a shield. Every few steps I felt it, the distinct sensation of being watched, not by my friends, not by anything in front of us, but from behind. When we reached the main road, relief should have washed over us. The distant hum of motorcycles, the faint glow of city lights, signs of life, of safety. Yet the feeling didn't leave. If anything, it grew stronger. It was Sophie who noticed it first. She froze suddenly, staring at the ground beneath a street lamp. "What is it?" I asked, though I already feared the answer. She lifted a trembling hand and pointed. Our shadows stretched across the pavement, long and thin under the harsh light. 6 of us, 6 shadows. But no, there were 7. One lingered just behind, taller, darker, its edges sharper, as though cut into the ground with a knife. Mark swore loudly and stepped away from the light. "It's a trick, just the angle. Shadows overlap all the time." But even he didn't sound convinced. We walked faster after that, almost running by the time we reached the guest house. None of us said goodnight. We scattered into our rooms like frightened animals retreating to separate cages, hoping walls and doors might keep the fear at bay. Sleep did not come easily. I lay in bed, the ceiling fan whirring above, the sheets damp with sweat. My notebook lay open beside me, but for the first time since arriving in Thailand, I couldn't bring myself to write. What words could contain what I had seen? Sometime after midnight, I must have drifted into a half-sleep. I woke to the sound of footsteps in the hallway outside my door. Slow, deliberate, clack, clack, clack. I held my breath. The steps stopped right outside my room. For a moment, silence. Then a faint rustle, like cloth brushing against wood. I stared at the door, every muscle in my body taut, certain that the handle would turn, but it didn't. After what felt like an eternity, the sound moved on, fading down the hallway. I exhaled shakily, told myself it was another guest, nothing more. But the corridor had been empty when I came in. Ours were the only rooms on this floor, and when I finally dared to glance toward the mirror across from my bed, I saw something that froze me where I lay. My reflection wasn't alone. A dark figure stood behind me in the glass, its face hidden, its hand resting gently on my shoulder. I turned instantly, nothing, only the empty room, but when I looked back at the mirror, the figure remained, closer now, smiling. The next morning, none of us looked well. Chris's bravado had dimmed. His eyes were bloodshot, his skin pale. Sophie kept glancing at the corners of the room, as though expecting something to emerge. Mark reeked of alcohol, already drinking before breakfast. Aaron looked exhausted, his prayers leaving his lips cracked and dry. And Nadia wouldn't speak at all, clutching the cloth bag as though it were the only thing keeping her tethered. I tried to bring it up, to put into words what we had all felt. "We need to stop," I said. "Whatever we did, it didn't end at the temple. It followed us. It's here now." Chris shook his head, forcing a laugh. "Come on, Daniel. You're letting this get to you. We scared ourselves, that's all." But as he spoke, his eyes darted to the window, where the faint outline of a shadow seemed to linger on the curtain, despite the morning sun. No one believed him, not even Chris himself. That day dragged like a fever dream. I wandered the city, trying to lose myself in the normalcy of markets and temples, but the sensation of being followed never left me. At times I caught glimpses, a shape in a shop's glass window, a figure disappearing around a corner, a presence behind me when no one was there. Each time I told myself it was imagination. Each time I believed it less. By evening I returned to the guest house, exhausted and trembling. The others were already gathered in the common room, their faces pale, their eyes hollow. It was Sophie who spoke first. "It's not just me, is it?" she whispered. "At night, I hear it. The footsteps, the clogs." Nadia finally lifted her head. Her voice was hoarse but clear. "I told you, once called, they do not leave." Silence filled the room, heavy, absolute. And in that silence I heard it again, faint but unmistakable. Clack, clack, clack. Somewhere upstairs, closer this time. I used to believe that nightmares belonged only to the night, fading with the morning sun. But in the days after the ritual, I learned otherwise. The haunting clung to us like a fever. It lived not only in the dark, but in daylight too, in every reflection, every shadow, every silence between breaths. It began with Sophie. We found her one morning in the guest house courtyard, sitting cross-legged on the cold tiles, her hair damp as though she had walked through rain. She wasn't speaking, only staring at her hands. When I touched her shoulder, she flinched violently and whispered, "They held me down." "What do you mean?" I asked. Her eyes darted to the corners of the courtyard. "Last night, in my room, I woke up and couldn't move. I felt them pressing on my chest, pinning my arms. I tried to scream, but no sound came. And then one of them leaned so close I could feel its lips on my ear." Her voice broke. "What did it say?" Nadia whispered. Sophie's eyes filled with tears. "It said my name." We sat in silence after that, too afraid to comfort her, too afraid to admit that part of us had been waiting for this, to hear that we weren't imagining it. Mark tried to dismiss it. "Sleep paralysis," he said, waving a hand. "Happens all the time. Medical thing. Nothing supernatural." But that night I heard him. His room was next to mine, the walls thin. Around midnight, the sound of breaking glass jolted me awake. Then his voice, harsh, frantic, shouting curses. I rushed to his door, pounded on it, but by the time he opened it, he looked hollow, drenched in sweat. "What happened?" I demanded. He pointed at the mirror above the sink. Its surface was cracked, spiderweb lines radiating outward from the center. "I saw someone in it," he muttered. "Not me, not anyone else. Just watching." I glanced at the mirror. Only my own pale reflection stared back, fractured by the cracks. But I believed him. Chris fared no better. His bravado, his endless jokes, they crumbled quickly. One afternoon I caught him sitting at the edge of his bed, his hands shaking. "I keep hearing it," he admitted. "The clogs, even when no one else does. Sometimes I hear them inside the room, walking around while I'm lying there pretending to sleep. I don't dare open my eyes." He tried to laugh after saying it, but the sound was brittle, a mask stretched too thin. And Nadia was unraveling fastest of all. She refused to part with the doll, carrying it everywhere, tucked inside her bag. Once, when Sophie suggested throwing it away, Nadia's face twisted with such panic that none of us pressed her again. "They are bound to it," she whispered one night as we sat huddled in the common room. "If I destroy it, they will scatter. They will not leave us. They will only grow angry." Her hands shook as she spoke, but her eyes were steady, as though she alone understood the rules of whatever curse we had invited. Arun sat near her, chanting softly under his breath, his fingers moving over a string of worn wooden beads. He seemed the calmest, but even he was not untouched. More than once I noticed bruises on his arms, finger-shaped, too dark, too deliberate to be accidents. When I asked, he only shook his head. "They test us," he said simply. And me? I wasn't spared either. My first encounter came 2 nights after Sophie's. I had been writing in my notebook, trying to record every detail while it was fresh, though each word felt like a confession carved in stone. At some point, I drifted off at the desk. When I woke, the room was cold. Too cold. The fan was off, the window closed, yet my breath clouded the air. I sat frozen, listening. The silence was immense. Then, softly, almost tenderly, a whisper brushed against my ear. "Daniel." I turned so quickly the chair toppled. No one was there. The door was locked, the curtains still. But when I looked back at the notebook, my stomach dropped. The last page, which I had left blank, was no longer empty. Words sprawled across it in handwriting that wasn't mine. "You cannot leave." The ink was still wet. We tried to keep each other sane. We ate together, walked the markets together, spoke of ordinary things. But always the shadows lingered, in mirrors, in windows, in the corner of the eye. Once at dusk, I caught sight of our reflections in a shop window. We were all there. Mark, Sophie, Chris, Nadia, Aaron, and me. 6 bodies, 6 faces. But in the reflection, 7. The extra figure stood directly behind me, and though its face was hidden, I swear I felt it smiling. That night, Nadia finally said the words none of us wanted to hear. There is no going back. The ritual has tied us to them. They will follow us wherever we go. Chris slammed his fist on the table. So what? We're just supposed to live like this? Being stalked, watched, losing our minds? Nadia's silence was answer enough. It was Sophie who whispered the truth we all felt, but feared to speak. They don't just follow. They're waiting for something. Her words settled over us like ash. And in the silence that followed, from somewhere deep within the guest house, we heard it again. Clack, clack, clack. Closer, always closer. I had thought the worst they could do was frighten us, that they lived only in mirrors, in footsteps, in whispered names, that as long as we kept our heads down, endured the sleepless nights and the chills, we might survive. I was wrong. The first mark appeared on Mark. It happened late one night, after another day of silence between us. We had grown quieter with each passing hour, our nerves too frayed to hold conversations. The guest house that once felt lively now seemed like a mausoleum, each door shut, each room filled with dread. I had just blown out the candle on my desk when I heard it, a strangled cry, muffled by walls. Then a crash. Mark's room. I stumbled into the hallway, heart hammering. The others were already emerging, Chris rubbing his eyes, Sophie clutching the hem of her shirt, Nadia clutching her bag as if it were a talisman. We gathered outside Mark's door. He was screaming now, the sound raw, animal. Aaron pressed forward, tried the handle. It gave way, and the door swung open. The sight inside froze us. Mark was on the floor, thrashing as though pinned by invisible hands. His shirt was ripped open, his chest heaving, his arms straining against something none of us could see. His face was red, veins bulging in his neck, eyes wild with terror. "Help me!" he screamed, his voice breaking. "Get it off! Get it off me!" We rushed forward. Sophie tried to grab his arm, Chris his shoulder, but the moment we touched him, we felt it too. A weight, heavy and cold, pressing down on him, like hands made of stone, invisible but real. Aaron began chanting, his voice urgent, trembling. Nadia dropped to her knees beside Mark, whispering words in Thai, tears streaming down her face. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. Mark collapsed onto the floor, gasping, sweat pouring from his skin. But on his chest, clear as ink on parchment, were 5 dark bruises, finger-shaped, as if something had pressed down with inhuman strength. We sat in the stunned silence, staring at the marks. They were too perfect, too deliberate to dismiss. Sophie covered her mouth, whispering prayers in French. Chris stumbled backward, pale, muttering, "No, no, no." Mark lay still for a long while, staring at the ceiling, his breath ragged. Finally, he turned his head toward me. "You saw it, didn't you?" His voice was barely audible. I hesitated. "Saw what?" "The one holding me down. The tall one. Cloaked. It leaned so close I felt its breath." His voice broke into a shudder. It smiled. No one argued, none of us could. Because in that moment, each of us realized the same truth. They weren't content with following anymore. They had crossed the threshold. The next morning, Mark refused to leave his room. When I knocked, he answered only once. "They marked me," he said from behind the door. "It's me first. Then it'll be the rest of you." His voice was flat, resigned. I couldn't think of a reply. That day stretched long and brittle. Sophie jumped at every sound, convinced something was breathing over her shoulder. Chris tried to distract himself with beer, his jokes now bitter, hollow things. Nadia wouldn't stop whispering to the doll, her words low and urgent, as though bargaining. Arun prayed louder than usual, his chants echoing down the halls, though his eyes betrayed the same fear gnawing at all of us. As for me, I wrote, not to explain, not to remember, but to cling to something solid, to prove that I still existed in a world that felt increasingly unreal. Yet even as my pen scratched across the page, I could feel it. The weight of unseen eyes. The faint creak of wooden clogs pacing outside my door. And worst of all, the certainty that Mark was right. The mark was only the beginning. That night I dreamed of the temple again. We were back in the circle, incense burning, shadows looming behind us. But this time, the seventh figure stepped forward. Its face was hidden, but its hands were pale, impossibly long. One by one, it reached out and pressed its fingers into each of our chests. Each touch burned like ice. Each touch left a mark. I woke gasping, clutching my chest. In the moonlight filtering through the curtains, I saw it, a faint outline, 5 bruised fingertips blooming on my skin. If fear was a sickness, by the fourth night it had spread through us like an infection. No one slept. No one ate. We moved through the guest house like ghosts, pale and trembling, waiting for footsteps that never stopped, for shadows that never left. Mark stayed locked in his room, refusing to come out except for water. The bruises on his chest had darkened, the outlines of fingers sinking deep into his skin like stains that would never heal. He muttered through the door sometimes, half coherent, as though talking to someone who wasn't there. The rest of us gathered in the common room, though gathered is the wrong word. We huddled, like animals in a storm, and it was there that the breaking began. Chris slammed a bottle onto the table, the beer sloshing out. "We're falling apart," he said, his voice hoarse. "We need to end this, whatever it takes." "End this?" Sophie snapped. She hadn't brushed her hair in days, her eyes red-rimmed. "How do you end something that isn't even alive?" Chris pointed at Nadia's bag. "Start with that. Burn the doll. Smash it. Whatever. You said yourself they're tied to it." Nadia clutched the bag closer to her chest, shaking her head violently. "No. If we destroy it, they'll have no anchor. They'll scatter. Do you understand? We will never escape them." "Maybe we already can't," Chris shouted, slamming his fist again. "Maybe they're already inside us." The room went still. For a moment I thought Sophie might cry. Instead she laughed, a dry, broken laugh. "He's right. They are inside. They whisper. At night they tell me things." She stared at her hands as though they belonged to someone else. "Sometimes I think I'll do what they say." Her words chilled me more than the footsteps ever had. Arun's voice cut through the silence, calm but firm. "There is another way, a cleansing ritual. Dangerous, yes, but possible." Nadia looked at him sharply. "No, we don't have the knowledge, the offerings, the sacred ground. If we try and fail, then at least we tried," Arun interrupted. Chris seized on the words. "Yes, that's it. We fight back. We don't just sit here waiting to be picked off." Sophie shook her head slowly. "You don't fight shadows. You endure them, until they consume you." The despair in her tone pulled at me, but Arun leaned forward, eyes burning. "If we do nothing, we're already dead." The argument spiraled. Voices rose, accusations flew. Chris accused Nadia of dooming us by clinging to the doll. Nadia accused Chris of provoking them with his arrogance. Sophie accused everyone of pretending there was hope when there wasn't. And me? I sat frozen, notebook in my lap, pen unmoving. Because as their words crashed against one another, I noticed something they did not: the shadows on the wall. They weren't ours anymore. 7 figures stretched long across the plaster, even though only 5 of us were in the room. And as the shouting grew louder, the 7th shadow leaned closer, its head tilted as if amused. "Stop," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "Please stop fighting." No one heard me, so I stood and shouted, louder this time. "Stop!" They froze, stunned into silence. The room pulsed with heavy air, the light from the single bulb flickering. I pointed to the wall. "Look!" They turned, and one by one, their faces drained of color. 7 shadows, standing where 6 should be, and the 7th, its hand rested on Mark's door. A second later, Mark screamed from inside. We rushed to his room, but the door slammed shut before we could enter. His cries tore through the wood, desperate, agonized. "Help me! Please! It's here!" Aaron threw his weight against the door. Chris joined him. Sophie clawed at the handle, sobbing. Nadia clutched the doll and prayed frantically. The screams grew louder, then abruptly stopped. The silence that followed was worse. When at last the door swung open, the room was empty. Mark was gone. Only the cracked mirror remained, its surface fogged as though someone had breathed against it. And in that fog, traced by an unseen finger, were words in Thai. Nadia read them aloud, her voice trembling. One by one. The night Mark disappeared, none of us slept. We sat in the common room, the lamps sputtering, each of us waiting for the sound of footsteps, the scrape of the mirror, the whisper of our names. But nothing came. Nothing except silence. And somehow the silence was worse. It pressed down on us like a weight, reminding us that one of us was already gone. Mark's door remained open, his belongings untouched, backpack by the bed, half-drunk bottle of water on the nightstand, shirt draped over the chair. He hadn't run. He hadn't packed. He had simply ceased. Chris was the first to break. "This is insane," he muttered, pacing the room, running a trembling hand through his hair. "People don't just vanish. Someone—" He turned suddenly, his eyes sharp on Nadia. "You knew. You said they'd scatter. You said if the doll was destroyed—" Nadia shot up, clutching her bag protectively. "Don't you dare blame me. I warned you. All of you. You laughed, you mocked, and now—" Her voice faltered, and she held the doll tighter, as though it might shield her from his rage. Chris advanced, but Arun stepped between them, beads clutched in his hand. "Enough. The more we fight, the stronger they grow." "Don't you get it?" Chris shouted. "He's gone, and we're next, unless we figure out who's letting them in." "Letting them in?" Sophie's voice cracked like glass. She was shaking, her face pale, her lips trembling. "You think one of us invited this?" Chris jabbed a finger toward Mark's empty room. "He didn't just vanish. Something opened a door for them. Maybe one of us." The accusation hung in the air, poisonous. I wanted to speak, to calm them, but the words withered in my throat. Because deep inside, I had begun to wonder the same. Not that one of us had betrayed the others deliberately, but what if the shadows had already taken root inside us? What if, through dreams, through whispers, through touches in the night, they were guiding us without our knowing? I remembered Sophie's confession, that she heard them tell her things, command her. I remembered the bruises blooming on my own chest, as though invisible hands had already claimed me. Couldn't it be any of us? Couldn't it be me? The air grew colder as the night deepened. The bulb above flickered. And then Nadia gasped. "The doll," she whispered. We all turned. Its porcelain face, once blank and expressionless, had changed. The corners of its mouth curled ever so slightly upward. A smile. Sophie screamed, stumbling back. Chris cursed and lunged as if to grab it, but Nadia held it away, shrieking, "No, don't touch it." "Look at it," Chris roared. "It's mocking us. That thing is the key, and you know it." Before anyone could stop him, he snatched the doll from her hands. Nadia's scream tore through the room, raw and broken. "Give it back," she cried. "You'll damn us all." But Chris only raised it high, his hands shaking. "Maybe if I smash it, this all ends." The lamp went out. The room plunged into darkness. And in that suffocating black, a sound rose, the unmistakable rhythm of clogs striking wood. Slow, deliberate. Clack, clack, clack. Closer. I felt Sophie's hand grip my arm like a vice. Aaron began to chant, his voice quivering. Nadia sobbed, reaching blindly for the doll. Chris froze, his breath ragged. Then, something brushed past me. Cold, heavy, real. The lamp sputtered back to life. The doll was gone. So was Chris. We tore through the guest house, calling his name, but there was no answer. His room was empty. His bag, his shoes, his passport, all still there. Only the mirror above his bed had changed. Across its surface, smeared in something dark, were three words, two by two. We gathered again in the common room, trembling, broken. Sophie wept openly now. Arun's prayers had grown frantic, desperate, his beads clattering in his shaking hands. Nadia rocked back and forth with empty arms, muttering that they had taken her child. And I stared at the notebook in front of me, because on its open page words were scrawled in unfamiliar ink. You cannot save them. You cannot save yourself. I dropped the pen. My hands would not stop shaking. The shadows lengthened across the floor. We were 5 no longer. We were 4. And tomorrow, maybe 3. By dawn, the guest house felt less like shelter and more like a trap. 2 of us gone, taken in silence. The rest of us sat around the low wooden table, the air heavy with incense from Arun's desperate chanting. Sophie's face was buried in her hands, her body shaking with silent sobs. Nadia stared blankly ahead, her arms still cradling the space where the doll had been, as if she could not accept it was no longer there. The thought clawed at me relentlessly. Mark had vanished into nothing. Chris had followed, and both times the doll had been near. The doll was not a trinket. It was the doorway. It was Aaron who broke the silence. My grandmother told me once, he said softly, his eyes half closed, about the hungry dolls. They are called Luk Thep in Thailand, child angels. Some say they bring fortune. Others, he swallowed, his fingers tightening around the prayer beads. Others say they are prisons, vessels for souls that cannot rest. Nadia's eyes flicked to him sharply. Not just any soul, she whispered. Cursed ones, children taken too soon, victims of rituals, offerings to the moon. Sophie lifted her head, her voice raw. You mean sacrifices? Nadia nodded slowly, her gaze distant. There is an old story. Once every generation, under the red moon, the monks would seal a restless spirit inside a doll, a spirit born of violence, of blood. It was the only way to contain it, to keep it from roaming free. The doll became its cage. Her lips trembled. But if the doll is touched during the red moon, the seal breaks, and the spirit is free again. The words sank into me like ice. We hadn't just called shadows, we had freed them. Aaron's voice trembled as he added, that temple, where we went, it was not abandoned. It was forbidden, a place where such seals were kept hidden. We weren't supposed to be there. Sophie let out a bitter laugh, almost a sob. So this is our fault. We broke the cage. And now, her voice trailed off, but I could finish the thought. Now they hunt us, one by one, until no witnesses remain. We spent the morning searching, every corner of the guest house, every alley nearby, as if the doll or our missing friends might simply reappear. Of course they didn't. But in the back of the guest house, behind a warped wooden door, we found something else. An old storage room, dust thick on the floor, walls lined with rotting shelves. And on one shelf, tucked beneath a stack of cracked bowls, lay a book. Its cover was brittle, eaten by time, but inside the pages were filled with Thai script, dense and faded. Nadia and Arun bent over it, translating in fragments. It spoke of the red moon ritual, a summoning, yes, but also a binding. The participants formed a circle, called the spirit, and sealed it into the vessel, most often a doll. The ritual was never meant for outsiders. The final passage, translated in whispers by Nadia, chilled me most. Those who unbind the spirit shall inherit its hunger. It will follow them beyond walls, beyond oceans, until its count is complete. One by one they will vanish into its shadow, until none remain. We sat in silence, the weight of the words suffocating. Sophie broke first. We have to destroy it. Find the doll. End this. Nadia shook her head violently. No, Destroying it unleashes everything at once. Don't you see? It is the only thing holding the spirit in shape. Without it, the shadows will be free. Everywhere, all the time. Then what? Sophie's voice cracked. We wait. We pray while it picks us off. Arun closed the book gently. His eyes looked older than I had ever seen them. There is one chance. We return to the temple. We restore the seal. But the ritual demands a price. The word lingered in the air like smoke. A price? I asked cautiously. Aaron nodded. A sacrifice. The spirit must be bound with blood. It always has been. Sophie's face drained of color. You mean one of us? The silence that followed was unbearable. That night I couldn't bring myself to sleep. I sat at the desk, staring at the notebook, waiting for the shadows to crawl across the floor. And sure enough, they did. One long, dark silhouette stretched from the corner, sliding toward me. It reached the wall, then the chair, then finally brushed against my leg like cold smoke. I froze. When I dared to look into the mirror above the desk, I saw them clearly. Not one, but many. Children. Dozens of small faces crowding behind me. Eyes hollow, mouths smiling with teeth too sharp. And in their tiny voices, layered one over another, they whispered the same word again and again. Sacrifice. We left the guest house at dusk. The streets of the small Thai town were quiet, unnaturally so. Shops shuttered, lanterns unlit, even the stray dogs gone from the alleys. It was as if the whole town knew what night this was and had hidden themselves away. The red moon was already rising, swollen and vein like an open wound in the sky. We walked in silence. Aaron leading, beads clutched tight. Nadia behind him, whispering to the space where her doll had been. Sophie dragging her feet, her eyes sunken but burning with grim determination. And me carrying only the notebook that had become both my anchor and my curse. Every step toward the temple felt heavier. The jungle path was alive with sound. Cicadas, the distant cry of night birds. But beneath it all, there was something else. Footsteps, always behind us, always just out of sight. Sophie heard it first. She spun, lantern shaking in her hand. They're following. We know, Arun said without turning. His voice was calm, but I could see his knuckles white around the beads. The path twisted, roots snaking underfoot, until the temple came into view. Its silhouette loomed black against the red moon, its broken roof jagged like teeth. The air grew colder as we approached. Inside, the circle of ash still stained the floor where we had first called them. The smell of burnt incense lingered, mixed with something sour, like old blood. And waiting in the center, on the cracked stone tiles, was the doll. It had changed. The porcelain skin was stained gray, the painted eyes darker, almost alive. Its mouth was split in a grin, showing tiny carved teeth that hadn't been there before. Nadia fell to her knees with a cry, reaching for it. My child! Arun grabbed her arm, pulling her back. No, it isn't yours anymore. The shadows thickened around the temple walls, rising like smoke. They pressed close, dozens of them, their shapes flickering in the moonlight. Among them I saw Mark's outline, his broad shoulders, his slumped head, and behind him, Chris, his face hollow, his mouth hanging open in a silent scream. They stood with the shadows now, watching, waiting. Aaron began to chant. His voice echoed through the ruined hall, steady despite the tremor in his hands. Nadia joined reluctantly at first, then louder, her voice high and frantic. Sophie stood rigid, lantern lifted, her eyes darting to every shadow that moved. I clutched my notebook, my breath shallow. The ritual demanded blood. That was the part we hadn't spoken of since reading it, but as Aaron chanted, I saw his eyes flick toward me. Then Sophie, then Nadia. He knew what would have to come next. The shadows surged, pressing closer. The sound of clogs striking stone filled the temple, slow and deliberate. Clack, clack, clack. The tallest of them stepped forward, the one that had marked Mark, the one that haunted my dreams. Its face was hidden, but its long, pale hands reached toward us. Aaron shouted above the roar of the chanting, his eyes burning. The seal must be fed. One life for many. That is the law. Sophie's voice broke. You mean one of us? Nadia screamed, clutching her head, as if the voices of the children were clawing at her mind. And I froze, caught between horror and inevitability, because I could see it in Arun's eyes. He already knew who it would be. The shadows closed in, the doll's painted grin gleaming in the red glow. The air was thick with chanting, with whispers, with footsteps that never stopped. And the choice, the sacrifice, hung over us like the blade of a guillotine. We had returned to the temple, but not all of us would leave it. I knew before Aaron spoke, even before his voice rose above the chanting, before Sophie's horrified gasp, before Nadia's sobbing plea, I knew. The blood price was mine. The tall shadow moved closer, its long fingers outstretched. The air grew thick, each breath a struggle. Around us, the children's whispers swelled like waves, chanting one word in 1,000 small voices. Sacrifice, sacrifice, sacrifice. Aran's face was pale but resolute. It must be done, he cried. Without it, the seal will never hold. We are already dead if we refuse. Sophie stumbled back, shaking her head violently. No, not him. There has to be another way. There isn't, Aaron said, his voice breaking. The spirit demands balance. One soul must be bound so the others can walk free. Nadia clutched at her temples, rocking back and forth, tears streaking down her face. The children told me. They told me it has to be him, the one who wrote their names, the one who carries their voices. And in that moment I understood. It wasn't chance. It wasn't fate. It was the notebook, my words, my records, my witness. Every time I wrote, I had given them shape, strength, a vessel of my own. The spirit didn't just want blood, it wanted my story. The shadows pressed closer. Sophie screamed as Mark's face emerged from the darkness, his eyes empty, his lips moving soundlessly. Chris stood beside him, mouth stretched into an inhuman grin. Their outlines flickered, no longer flesh but echoes. Run, Sophie shouted, grabbing my arm. We can fight this. But Aran held her back, his eyes wet with grief. If he runs, we all die. Don't you see? This is the only way. The tall shadow loomed over me now, its hand hovering above my chest. I felt its touch without contact, a crushing weight, cold as the grave. And in the reflection of the broken temple mirror, I saw myself already fading, my shadow lengthening to join theirs. I sank to my knees. The notebook slipped from my hands, pages fluttering. Words I had written blurred, as if erased by unseen fingers. My story was being swallowed, just as Mark's had, just as Chris's had. Sophie fell beside me, clutching my shoulders, tears streaming down her face. Don't let them take you, please. I wanted to promise her. I wanted to lie, but my voice was gone. Aaron's chanting grew louder, urgent, echoing against the temple walls. Nadia joined, her voice cracked, broken. The shadows screamed, the children's whispers rising to a shrill pitch. And then, the hand pressed down. Pain tore through me, cold and fire all at once. My chest burned where the fingers sank in, branding me with the final mark. The world spun. The temple cracked with light and shadow, colliding in a storm. I heard Sophie's scream fade, heard Aaron's chanting falter, and then silence. When I opened my eyes, the temple was still. The doll sat once more at the center, its painted eyes closed, its smile gone. The shadows were gone too. The whispers, the footsteps, the clogs on stone, all gone. Sophie lay slumped against a pillar, sobbing with exhaustion. Aaron knelt in prayer, his body shaking. Nadia rocked slowly, whispering lullabies to the silent air. They were alive. I was not. I looked down and saw my hands, pale, faint, already dissolving into smoke. My notebook lay open, but where my words had been, only blank pages remained. I was the seal, bound in ink and shadow, caged in silence. My story ended here, within these walls. But the ritual was complete. The others would walk free, for now. Because even as the red moon sank beyond the horizon, I felt it. The doll's porcelain eyelids fluttered, almost imperceptibly. Its mouth twitched, as if holding back a smile. And in the hollow of the temple, in a voice too faint for the living to hear, the children whispered still. One day the seal will break again, and someone will tell this story. Thanks for watching the whole video. Please give me a like and subscribe to the channel to watch more interesting stories.